Fin the Week is brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services industry.
Hi there, I'm Amelia.
I'm Paul.
I'm Russell.
And this is Fin the Week. How's everybody doing? How are we this week?
Good. Yeah. Looking forward to some more sunny weather. It's continued since last week.
Yeah, same. It's beautiful over here in Guernsey today.
Hopefully more of that as we head into the Easter break. And of course, this week, a bit of a smaller panel, but we have got a cracking topic. So we're going to be asking whether friction is always a bad thing. But before we get into it, Paul, have you ever accidentally bought something with one click that you didn't mean to?
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I've definitely done it on Amazon more than once. Because they make the shopping process so seamless that most of the time it's a pleasure because you just don't have to think about it. But they've got that kind of buy with one click button that's caught me out more than once. I've accidentally bought something that I did intend to buy eventually, but you've kind of ordered it before you know, or you've ordered the wrong color or something like that. Or the thing I do most commonly on Amazon actually is I order something to the wrong address. Luckily, I notice it in time, and their system is kind of well built enough that you can kind of immediately go back in there, change the delivery address, and there's no harm done. But then as I was thinking about this question as well, I remembered recently I had to buy a new car insurance policy, and that process caught me out because I went through a comparison site, and as part of the search settings I put in, I specifically ticked the box to say remove the, what do they call them, telematic policies. So the policies that will put what they call a black box in your car, or that they use your own phone data to monitor your driving habits. And I deselected that option, so I didn't want those policies. So when I was then reviewing the quotes that came back, I found one that looked suitable, clicked to go through to the actual insurer's website to finish the process. And as I went through that process, the insurer's website presented me with two different routes. There was the default route that was already selected, which was something called, they called it an app policy. And then the other route was a different named policy. And I didn't, the fault I made was that I didn't spend the time reading the page in enough detail. But I just assumed that the app policy was a policy that was slightly cheaper because you manage everything via the company's app. You don't speak to their team or anything. You just sort of manage it, you self-manage. And that's the way they pitched it on the site, to be fair. I certainly didn't read the small print, but the headline was that. And so I thought, oh, that sounds fine. I'm happy using an app. So I went ahead with that. And then a little while later, I got an email that said, thanks for purchasing a new policy. Once we've got the system set up and running, you can then install the app so that we can monitor your driving. And then if you drive well, you'll get a cheap price forever. And if you don't, it posed the idea that if you don't drive well, your price won't be quite as good next year. And I just thought that seems sneaky because it really wasn't that clear when I went through the process. And so I suppose that counts as an example where the process to purchase it was actually pretty smooth. But my natural habit is to just scan read stuff as I'm going through these processes, and I didn't fully understand the product. So managed to make the change afterwards, but it certainly wasn't easy. So yeah, that's an example where what we're going to be talking about today, friction, might have been a useful thing.
I think it's an interesting one. You were saying about the address thing. I moved house just a few months ago, and I cannot tell you the amount of things I've ordered online that have gone to my old house. And there are some retailers that do it really well. As you say, like Amazon, it's quite easy to save it last minute, or even if you've put in the wrong address, you can then change your delivery address. But there's lots of websites I've used, lots of retailers who there barely is even a step where you get to see your address. It's so quick. And even then, when I've gone and used that retailer again, and I'm really aware of it, there doesn't seem to be a really obvious place to check your address. So that's caught me out so many times. Do you think it's a case that helpful tech is maybe becoming too helpful?
Yeah, I mean, again, I was thinking about this before we started talking, and I think helpful tech used on basic things is good. Stuff that doesn't matter too much. So the Amazon example is one where, hey, if you accidentally order to the wrong address or you make a mistake, they make it pretty easy to kind of fix that mistake. But when it comes to something more important, like the car insurance example, which could kind of, because I've read stories of people using these systems where they'll be driving down a road that runs parallel to a motorway. Driving down a motorway that runs parallel to a lower speed limit road, and the app will think that they're on the lower speed limit road and therefore mark them down for speeding, and that then meaningfully impacts your future insurance sort of standing. And so having friction in the process of making decisions like that is actually quite important, I would argue, because it's not really a simple mistake. It's a mistake that has consequence. So yeah, I think these systems, having them built to be smooth and easy to use, is obviously important. But going too far with it can actually have some unintended consequences.
And yeah, I mean, it seems that as designers, developers, marketeers, the idea, you feel like the natural is to reduce friction, make it easier, make it faster, remove those barriers. But sometimes slowing down the user, as we say, can cause more of a problem. Russ, as a designer, is your instinct always to make things as smooth as possible?
Well, I suppose what you want to achieve in terms of user experience is often set by the business objectives. And I think it's the business objectives that really form the foundation for what you kind of see at the end in terms of interface design. Amazon's a really interesting example because they've spent a long time trying to make that platform as easy as possible to use. I think there's a famous statistic that Jeff Bezos invested, I think, 100 times more capital into customer experience than advertising at the beginning of Amazon. So it's very much focused on trying to have the smoothest, quickest user journey as possible, which aligns with the business objectives because people are purchasing quickly. They're probably thinking, is it better to have a one-click order and then kind of deal with what happens afterwards than have friction in that process and then have less orders? They've probably calculated that in terms of returns and administration afterwards, it's better for the business to kind of do it that way around, even if there is orders that are cancelled or there's kind of queries post clicking, this kind of buy to click option. So you'll probably find that it's the business driving it as much as it is the designers. In the case of like a regulated space like finance, I guess that's where it becomes more complicated because there's certain questions people are going to need to answer. You can't quickly go through like even a mortgage calculator form without accepting like various terms and conditions and asking questions, and especially if it's a amount you can borrow, an evaluation in that way. I think they need to be quite kind of careful in what they say and the information that goes into it. So yeah, I think there's cases where it is just one click and you want that to be smooth. You need to be careful with addresses. I've also moved house a few years ago, and I was having post turning up at our old address for years because of that very reason. And I think there's a big difference between, say, retail and finance in that respect, where you kind of want that friction at certain points to make sure that you're asking the right questions, that people are accepting the correct terms and conditions, that they can't just go through and change their car insurance or change around their their pension pots. And also, I think we probably forget in the world of design, we're not always designing for the end user sat at their desk, just kind of browsing on their computer. As a customer or as a consumer, there's the whole process of the internal team using these systems as well and using these platforms. You know, I know people who work in finance and they have to make huge payments, for example, using these systems. And they're not simple processes to make, as if you're, say, administrating a trust or something like that. Or you're like onboarding a client or closing a client's account. There's digital systems that are used to do that. And that's more encouraged these days as well. You know, they don't want their teams being, you know, swamped in paperwork. It's all done through digital systems, which need to be carefully planned out. So they, you know, they kind of look at areas like, well, they kind of meet regulation around anti-money laundering, and make sure very strict processes are followed. So those internal processes as well, you couldn't just have like a one-click transfer, you know, £10 million or whatever into another bank account. So that's another example of where friction is really important. So there's so many different scenarios where friction is important. And there's also a law that's worth looking up as well called Hick's Law, which is a design law, which it's probably not going to explain it too well, but essentially it's if you give the user more choice, the decision making becomes harder. So you kind of want to remove choice and decision making to make the experience as easy as possible.
I was speaking of similar things. I was really interested in behavioral economics for some time, and there's the idea of choice architecture and principles of choice architecture, which kind of similar along the same lines of what you were just speaking about there, where if people are kind of overwhelmed by choice, they become they find it very difficult to then choose because there's just too much available. And then I was kind of looking through the principles of choice architecture, and one of those is to expect user error. So a good system will expect people to make an error and then do its best to solve that. And I think the stakes are probably getting higher now because, first of all, AI-enabled systems are making sort of user journeys much smoother, quicker. You can achieve more in less time, which obviously means you can kind of reach a result more quickly, but it also means you can reach an error more quickly as well. So if a certain percentage of users are going to make an error, whatever you do, you know, you're just speeding up that process to error. So I suppose do user interface designers, do you think that in this kind of brave new world of AI, we need to rethink how we kind of design interfaces to expect that error and kind of put blockers in the way, if you like?
Is that an error that an agent would encounter or a user?
Well, I suppose user really, because the agent will be acting on behalf of a user, but ultimately it's the user who carries the can.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting in the context of when an agent would encounter that error on behalf of a user, but also users encountering those errors, because an error is a point where it's a flag that they need to put in, like whether it's a mandatory field or they've input the data incorrectly. You know, it could be something quite simple as, you know, putting in your card number and you've chosen the wrong type of card. So you might have chosen MasterCard and put in the wrong, you know, you might have a debit card, for example. So I think those errors are gonna like force the user to perhaps pay attention. And to get things right in a world where things are just going to get faster and faster to complete. Because ultimately, that's kind of what users want, right? They don't want to, you know, no one wants to be stuck at their screen filling in forms. That's the boring bit, and that's the bit that people just want to be done as quickly as possible. You know, I think most people probably enjoy exploring the internet and ordering online and, chatting to friends and the social aspect of it. But when it comes to forms, that's probably the lowest down on people's list, especially if you go to older websites where they become even more difficult to use. You kind of give up. And that's why people go to these big websites and comparison sites, because they kind of take a lot of that stress away, a lot of that research away. But you don't want it too seamless, because everyone just wants to have that one click, don't they, on everything? Because that's the bit that people don't want to be wasting their day doing. You don't want to be filling in a form when you don't want to be filling in those details when you're booking your holiday, or getting car insurance or opening bank account, whatever you're doing. You literally just want, the user wants that to be one click, but how do we stop it being one click to make sure that we capture all of the information that we need to in the right way? So yeah, it's definitely it's a case by case basis. We're talking a lot about progressive disclosure recently, and wrote an article on it. I think it's important as well. When you're filling out forms, and like the example that you gave, Paul, with insurance, instead of being presented with loads of form fields, as you fill in the form, it should then change, and it should give you that information as you go through, instead of it just being a set process for everybody. And that's where progressive disclosure works really well. And I remember I looked at every major mortgage calculator. No, not everyone. Maybe the top 5 or 6 in the UK mortgage calculators a few years ago. And the best one used that progressive disclosure approach. So, for example, if there was 2 people applying for a mortgage, and you wanted an idea of what you could borrow, you wouldn't be presented with 2 sets of information to fill out. You'd choose whether there was kind of 2 people first, and then the page would change if there was two people applying, which sounds quite basic, but actually you'd be surprised how many forms and systems don't work in that way and really struggle to cater for different use cases. So yeah, there's kind of techniques you can use, but kind of going back to friction again, I think it is important to have in place, instead of just flying through the process in one click when it comes to like booking or ordering or applying. Yeah.
And thinking about AI, if when you're trying to strike that balance between speed and convenience, and of course, like safety and comprehension, does AI make that easier, or do you think it makes it harder?
Well, I think it has to make it easier, because AI, the exciting thing about AI and all the in all the ways you can adopt it is just making everyone's lives easier. It's giving us more time to do other things that we enjoy, or it's allowing us to, multiply our output. And I think if it isn't, then it isn't working, and then we shouldn't be using it in that context. I think there's an interesting, OpenAI have been working on something called Operator, and there's kind of 2 AI agents that have been quite interesting out there, which is Project Mariner by Google and Operator by OpenAI. Project Mariner was more of a research tool when I first looked at it. Well, Operator is really interesting, and I'm sure it's embedded into their new browser as well a bit more. But it does carry out those end-to-end, transactional kind of journeys for you. So it would it will do your online shopping. It will it will book a seat at a local restaurant for you. But it stops at the point where the user has to make a decision, which is a really key decision. Like, it would ask it wouldn't go ahead and book your reservation at a certain time and a certain place without then checking with the user. It wouldn't it wouldn't change your car insurance or your building's insurance without checking with the user first, being like, is this actually what you want to do? I don't think we'll actually ever, I don't know where we get to a point where it will stop checking. It's going to be quite dangerous though, because then what do you end up with? You can end up with anything.
I think there are people in the world though who that is their ambition, isn't it? And I think there are people whose vision it is that you'll have an AI agent that will act on your behalf and make decisions within a set of parameters, I suppose. So yeah, I suppose the most basic examples will be you've got a fridge that knows when the milk is running low, and it'll go and order some milk so that it's, you never run out of milk, basically. But there'll be people pushing for that to expand into all different areas of life. So yeah, the car insurance example is probably a good one, because it's certainly in the UK, it's just, for a lot of people, myself included, it feels like a burden. It's just every year you get a renewal quote. You have to remember who you're insured with. You have to go and check some other quotes. It's just something you have to do. I don't do it because I like buying car insurance. I do it because I have to buy car insurance. And so if you're like me, you naturally kind of get a bit lazy with that process, and you sort of get through it as quickly as possible, with the only thing in mind being, I want to make sure I don't get ripped off, I suppose, is what I'm thinking. And I suppose as I get older, I also think I want to make sure I've got a good deal or good coverage. I'm not buying something rubbish. But if AI starts to sort of get involved in that sort of process, I suppose the risks are quite high, because you won't necessarily know there's been a mistake made until you need to rely upon the car insurance, and then you make a claim, and the claim then gets rejected because who knows, you might not have given your agent the right spelling of your surname, and it invalidates the insurance or something silly like that. I worry that that's the direction that we're going in, and who, I suppose, as designers of systems, I suppose we've got a role to play in setting the guardrails a bit and managing that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what we're talking about is designing the interaction with the agent more than the interaction with the agent and the end, and the firm at the end. And if there's an issue with your car insurance because of something in the agent's put for you, then the agent's going to have that conversation with the firm and then be relaying back to you as well, and probably apologizing. Does it at that point compensate you if it's made a mistake? Who's kind of liable in that situation if the AI agent's made a mistake? Because I guess you'll need insurance for the AI agent to take
Gosh,
out.
yeah.
In case that would be your main insurance package, because the AI agent would be doing everything on your behalf. But I think people are so busy, feels like more than ever, and the things people that don't like doing, they're always looking for for technology to kind of help them with that, whether it's their weekly shop and using kind of subscriptions, whether it's chores. I mean, everyone's dream, right, would be to not have to go shopping and have a robot doing all their chores, right? Because then you'd have time to do, what you want to do, whether that's like reading, or whether that's spending time with your kids, whether that's playing music, or it's all those, as you get older, it's difficult to find less and less time for those, for the things that you enjoy, because you're so busy on just on maintenance of your life with all these different packages that you have on the go that need to be renewed, and just kind of keep things going. So if technology can actually do all of that on our behalf, whether that's AI, whether in the longer term, whether there's other technology that we can use, then I think people are going to start to adopt it, because it gives us time, and ultimately time is the most valuable commodity, and it's short on supply. Yeah, I think anything that makes people's lives easier, they will. But there's a level of risk, isn't there? Because I don't know about you, I wouldn't feel too comfortable with having an AI robot doing all the chores around my house. But that could be a generation gap. That might be the generation gap.
Yeah, because I can genuinely remember the time when people would say they don't feel comfortable buying something online, like that. That was an actual thing, and you didn't look at them and think, "You old fossil." you sort of, you just sort of accepted it because you're like, yeah, I can kind of see where they're coming from. It took a while before, I suppose, Amazon was the first where you thought, okay, they seem to have a process here. I feel comfortable buying from them. And then over time that sort of spread out to independent online websites that you then bought from. And now it's just, you just don't even think about it, do you? And I think usage of AI agents could go the same way.
Yeah. I think people will start to adopt it. They'll get more time back. They can do things that they enjoy. One thing I haven't checked out is the new OpenAI browser, and I think that just goes to show. Well, I did check it out, but I haven't. I did check it out, but I haven't used it to the point where I would switch to it. And it's really interesting because it just shows how change is like so slow. Like mass adoption of like browsers or a lot of online shopping, like to begin with, it takes a long time. Even if people get it right, I think moving to this new way of living, really, where you're using agents to carry out these tasks, you'll have people at the cutting edge of technology, probably already doing it somehow, and if the technology isn't out there, they'll probably create something which can kind of do it for them with a variety of different systems, or code it themselves. But for mass adoption commercially, it might take 10 years before we see AI agents being used by people, kind of day to day, and then people, stop thinking about it. It just becomes like a normal part of their lives. Maybe sooner, it depends on the impact it will have. But yeah, it's kind of, it's going to happen. It's just how we get that level of trust and how we get those right points in that process, just to avoid it being complete chaos. And like you say, having all kinds of things, all kinds of transactions being made on your behalf, having the wrong things turning up, having the wrong, having the wrong insurance, for example, having tickets to the wrong event, everything, everything happening all at once.
One of the things that led us to discussing this today was we've recently been talking about consumer duty and what they term sludge practices, which they define as excessive, unnecessary frictions. And I think what the FCA is getting at with that is maybe the classic example of the firm that you're locked into that you can't get out of easily, like that. So you could maybe sign up for something online very easily, but then to cancel it, you have to phone some office that's only open at a certain time and wait on the phone for ages. That sort of, I suppose that would be an example of a sludge practice. And then it got it got me thinking, certainly, like because they're removing unnecessary friction, but is there such a thing as necessary friction, which I think we've established there probably is. But in your role as a designer and someone who has assessed user experience workflows across, say, like private banking apps, for example, and or mortgage journeys and things like that, have you ever had to stop and think, we need to introduce some friction here? Or is that a thought that ever enters your mind, or is it just something you're naturally geared towards thinking about? This is a high risk piece of work.
Well, normally the scope of what's required to introduce the friction is set by the client, so they'll have a specification document which are various like fields, and they'll have kind of set process for closing an account, let's say. But I think making it fair, it does come down to the patterns that are used. And there's in UX, it's referred to as dark patterns, where it might be difficult to close an account. A link might be hidden, or the text might be too small, which you probably see. Sometimes you can see it when you're going through, even to purchase something that they're trying to upsell you a subscription or something else, and actually the link through to kind of going through to the checkout is really small, and it's really small text, which is actually a bit of a dark pattern in terms of design, and that's what would be referred to. I think what we do consider as designers is accessibility, though, and that's just making sure that these systems are, can be used by everybody. So if you've got low vision, we look at, the size of text and color contrast, and if you're using a screen reader, making sure that the hierarchy of the page is labeled correctly, and there's alternative text for images. So if you can't see images, the alternative text explains what that image is. So in the view of consumer duty, that's good, because it's fair and transparent services and products for everybody, no matter what ability you are. So we consider that as a designer. But yeah, normally the actual process and the scope is set by the client, because they have form fields that they need to use, which normally need to be input back into their own systems, their own like CRMs and their own databases to kind of manage it in house. So our role as a designer, though, is to introduce that friction when those key steps are required. So if it's saying that you're a board member, for example, or if you or if you perhaps have business shares, or those kind of steps, introducing friction at that point, perhaps in a like a company registration process would be quite important. But yeah, normally that's kind of set by the client. And our role is normally to work within that scope and make it as easy and as smooth as possible. So we're actually the ones probably trying to reduce friction, to be honest. And friction's introduced by the client, because it's the client who kind of wants all these various steps in place.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's ultimately kind of the game to have that friction there, but ultimately you don't want the user to kind of even notice. So for them, it's a really smooth process, and they're not even really noticing that at those points you're slowing them down or you're adding in those extra steps.
Yeah, but talking more about forms, I feel like when we're talking about friction, you always think of forms, but it isn't always, because it could be adding a product to your cart, whether that's in finance or retail. It could be I think we've talked about investments before as well, which is a really interesting area, because moving your pensions, your kind of pension pots around, for example, it could be as simple as introducing friction in the way of like a pop-up, just saying, do you want to do this, instead of like carrying out that action, which isn't which for the end user is, I think it's important for them to have some visibility of what's going to happen next. They could also you could also just kind of click on a button by mistake. So the best practice is, if it's an important decision, is having a pop-up to say, are you sure you want to do this? And it could just be as simple as that, which I think in that case, it is the responsibility of the designer and working with the developers to make sure that for those key interactions, there is a warning message which kind of pops up, and maybe a couple, although you don't want to kind of overdo it. It depends on it, even an approval step. So often with some of our bigger clients, we have 4 eyes checks on even making simple content changes to a website, publishing an article, let's say. If it's written by an expert, then they might want internally to have that 4 eyes check on content which is published. So it's then our job as the team producing that content publication workflow for them to make sure that there's a 4 eye kind of checked. And I think that happens a lot in regulated firms as well, where there's normally approval, whether it's by like managers, to kind of have that 4 eye check process. So often that check process you could have run through into the website to avoid someone, even clicking on a pop-up. You could take it the next level if it's a really key transaction, maybe for a large sum of money, you could then offset that risk even further by having an approval step after that. So yeah, I think there's ways to mitigate it. It depends on the level of it depends how big the consequences are of that interaction.
Mm. Yeah, and it feels like because I always like processes where you have to take one step at a time, because everything that's presented to you in a system, whether it's a website or an app or process, whatever, everything you see is a decision, effectively. So like on a website, the navigation is a decision to use it or not, and then the content, you decide whether to read it or not, and all the buttons that are there, you have to decide which one you interact with. And so it feels like that the higher risk a process is, the fewer decisions should be available at any one time. Like, so a perfect process, I suppose, if you ignore every other thing, is that it would just be one thing at a time that says, okay, here's the first thing you need to decide. And is that what you mentioned? I think progressive disclosure, is that the right term? Is that basically what that is? It's presenting the most pared back decision that you can at any one time.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of progressive disclosure because it doesn't overwhelm the end user, whether that's on a website, whether it's an internal system, with too much choice. Like, the last thing you want is to visit a website and be presented with 50 form fields. I think if you can go through that process, or even like even if you are buying some new, like, car insurance, building insurance, breaking that down into steps so you kind of progressively disclose that information. Often when we see big forms as a designer, our first thing we look at changing is like breaking that up into steps, because I think it's a much neater and it's a much more flexible way to put that journey in front of a user. Then you can label the steps, you can categorize the steps, but you can also change them depending on how that first step was completed, and how they progress through that form ends up perhaps kind of changing.
That's forms are interesting as well, because we work with a lot of clients who have legacy system or legacy processes where certain things that you need to do are done via forms that you effectively have to print out and fill in. And I always groan when I see that, because I think, God, you could do that so much more elegantly through an online system, which all clients are generally working towards that. But as we've been talking today, I've just thought, actually, is there something to be said for an old-fashioned print and fill in form, simply because it makes you engage your brain and it makes you actually take care over the process? Because I don't know what it's like for everyone else, but when I have to literally sit down with a pen and fill in a form, there's a sort of nervous response that I naturally get, which is like, God, I hope I don't write the wrong thing here, because I only get one go. So I suppose there's something to be said for that.
Yeah, I think, I recently went through the process of opening up a savings account, and all the forms were kind of printed out on my behalf to look at and fill in. And I think people will always still want to work in that way. It depends on your setup as well, and this is where consumer duty comes in. Like, not everyone has a nice big monitor, or or a new laptop. We're kind of assuming that everyone has technology which they can easily use all these websites on, but not everyone can afford it, or maybe they're just not interested in technology. And there's a lot of different use cases, and I often think of that, and it's something that you need to constantly remind yourself of when you're designing websites, is that we design websites on these shiny, like, Mac machines that have beautiful pixel resolution and color contrast. And then, although technology is improving, but then if you watch an end user using it, they're probably using it on the screen with their contrast whacked like right up. They're probably on Windows. And a completely different setup, because they're not perhaps so technology minded as the people working in the agency. So yeah, I think that this is where UX research comes in, or user research, because I think that sits between what we're presenting to them in terms of interface design. It sits between the business objectives and what we're presenting as the interface designer. You need to constantly be, speaking to your users, like sending out surveys, whether it's a pop-up survey on the website or like a survey in an email, interviewing users, conducting usability testing studies. And the higher the stakes, the more important that becomes. So you need to be doing that on a regular basis and compiling all of this feedback, which is getting easier using AI as well, like analyzing transcripts and crunching data to find out exactly what people are struggling with, but also how they're using your website, how they're using your system, because it might be different to what the initial stakeholders thought or how they used it when they were creating it all. So it's just really important to understand. And there might be steps of friction there, which are just too difficult. So you might have to do it in another ways. I set up an account recently where I had to call the firm to get an ID number so I could log into the platform. It just felt like a process of friction, which wasn't necessary. And what I was, you would expect the process of obtaining your ID number to be like a digital. And it was difficult to call. I had to wait. I had to get a call back in the end because no one answered. They called back. I was asked some questions. Then I was given an ID number. Then I used that to kind of log into my account. Now, perhaps that had to happen because they had to verify my identification over the phone. But it felt like a bit of a, it probably took an hour or two because I had to wait for callbacks. After making the phone call, I was then left a little bit kind of wondering what was going to happen next because I didn't know when they were going to call back, which wasn't great for customer service. And then, it was a really nice, pleasant conversation. I got my ID number, I could log in, I could access my account. But that is a good example of friction, which was kind of taken away from the digital process to kind of something like over a phone call. So if I was the firm looking at that process, I'd be thinking, how could we improve that and improve the customer experience? So perhaps the ID number could be created online and ID verification could be done in a different way.
I think one of the most interesting areas, certainly in financial services, that is going to need to think about this whole process is pensions, because people have in the UK, workplace pensions have been around for quite a while now. So everyone who's working will be, unless they've opted out, will be paying into a workplace pension. And that means people, as they move jobs, pick up different pension pots from different providers. That's then driving a growth in people consolidating pensions with one provider, moving pension pots around. And that's quite a high risk area, I suppose, because if you move your pension to the wrong place or you make a mistake with it, that's a meaningful thing. But at the same time, pension providers can't be seen to be trapping people. They have to be able to enable transfers. So I think there's a fine balance there between making the process smooth and easy, but not making it so easy that it's one click and whoosh, your pension's gone somewhere else. I don't think what the answer to that is, and I don't know who is doing it well, but I think that's going to be a real area of focus, where how do you balance that, removing the sludge practices which trap people versus introducing good interventions that make sure people know what they're doing and why they're doing it.
And that becomes even more confusing with using an AI agent, doesn't it? Like, they're going to have to deal with the sludge. So the agents are going to be the ones trying to almost like bypass all of this, because they're going to be trying to act in the best interests of their master, let's call it. And finding the best deal for them and the best result for them. So it's going to be really interesting, because like AI agents are going to be completely like unemotional when it comes to being drawn in different directions through like an interface design. They're going to be looking at it in a very like kind of systematic way, and our website's going to have to start introducing different ways to provide sludge to agents than humans, because they're going to be able to get through processes faster and less likely to be, kind of convinced to stay, because they're not going to have any emotion at all. They're not going to have any emotional attachment to a company and brand loyalty and thing like that. So yeah, it's going to be quite interesting to see how companies like retain customers when AI agents are making decisions, or maybe giving only one decision back to its back to the user of them. It's going to be a whole new world in terms of user journeys. It's going to be one user journey for the human and one user journey for the agent too. I start thinking about.
Yeah. I'm sure this is all stuff we'll explore further and touch upon in coming episodes. But for now, shall we play some jargon busters?
Yeah.
I can't remember how you guys did last week.
I think
it was a while, wasn't it?
Yeah, we got there. I think Pat did quite well, didn't he? He sort of had a good explanation for it.
Yeah. So this is where I put your kind of industry knowledge or industry term knowledge to the test. I've got my list of those terms. I pick one at random. Today, I want you to have a go at explaining the meaning of the word spread.
This one. So spread, I think I've heard spread in the sense of to do with investments, and it's about I am guessing. So it would be spreading your risk, I suppose, or spreading your exposure. So if you've got a pot to invest, you spread that pot among different investments. That would be my guess.
It's quite a broad term. I can't help but think of it in the context of betting for some reason.
Yeah, spread betting.
But I could see why, like, spreading your risk as well across different like commodities and industries to reduce your risk. It might be related to that, but I'm going to go with betting because I'm not really quite sure what is spread betting when you kind of do the same thing, but you kind of do it across lots of different like sports or. Well, no, maybe not sports, but events.
So spread means this is the difference between the bid price and the ask price.
So we were nowhere near.
So we can see what you're going for.
Yeah. Okay. So that's because if it was what I thought it was, I was thinking that's quite a logical name for it, but it's not. Spread. It is jargon still.
Yeah. It's not often logical, really, is it? As we're learning.
So it's investment. It's investment again. It's investment term again. Yeah, the bid price and the ask price. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Price difference.
So there we go. I mean, of course, we will have more of this in the next episode. Speaking of the next episode, we're going to be discussing what happens when AI becomes your financial advisor. What happens then, Paul?
Well. Yeah, I mean, who knows? Because this was all driven by, well, first of all, like the term advice is really hotly protected. Like if you work with anyone in financial services, they'll almost always have had a story of using the word advice in a piece of marketing or proposing to use it in a piece of marketing and being shot down by compliance. And funnily enough, it happened to me this week. The word advice snuck into something and somebody said, whoa, careful, like, can't say advice. So yeah, but this was the idea for the next episode was driven by some research carried out by Lloyd's Banking Group that suggests that I think they said 56% of UK adults have used AI to help them manage their money over the last year. So it's obviously happening right now. People are relying on AI but I don't know whether they're getting advice per se, but they're certainly asking questions of AI relating to their money. So it's only a matter of time before AI is dishing out advice. So I think, yeah, it'd be a good discussion to kick around. Well, what does that mean? How do brands exist in that world? and protect consumers at the same time.
I think it's definitely going to be an interesting discussion. As I say, that's coming up on next week's episode. But that is it for this week. Thanks both for joining us, and thanks for listening. And as I say, we'll be back next week.
Before we go, it's time for a quick shameless plug. This episode was brought to you by Indulge, a digital agency built on thinking for the global financial services sector. If you're looking for an agency that can specialise in UX and design, production and marketing, then look no further. To find out more, visit indulge.digital. Thanks for listening.